My name is Natalie Reynolds, and at 32 years old, I never thought I would find myself smiling when I heard my younger brother Aaron had been arrested. The golden child, the favorite, the one my parents mortgaged their souls to protect while they left me to drown during my divorce and financial collapse just 2 years earlier. The phone rang at 2 in the morning. Mom was sobbing. Dad was yelling in the background. They needed my legal expertise, my money, my help. After a lifetime of being second best, the tables had finally turned. Before I tell you how I responded to my parents' desperate plea for help, take a second to subscribe and comment where you are watching from. Trust me, what happened next changed everything about our family dynamic forever. Growing up in suburban Boston, we were the picture-perfect American family, at least from the outside. My father, William, worked as a hospital administrator, and my mother, Catherine, taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. We lived in a beautiful colonial-style home with a sprawling backyard, took summer vacations to Cape Cod, and attended church every Sunday. My childhood photo albums show a smiling little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin. But photos only tell the story their owners want to preserve. From my earliest memories, my parents set impossibly high expectations. I learned to read before kindergarten, skipped 1st grade, and was enrolled in every enrichment program my parents could find. Piano lessons on Mondays, advanced math tutoring on Wednesdays, competitive swimming on weekends. There was no room for failure in the Reynolds household. When I was 8 years old, everything changed with the arrival of my baby brother Aaron. I still remember the day they brought him home from the hospital, a tiny bundle with wispy blonde hair and bright blue eyes. My mother cooed over him for hours, and my father proudly paraded him around to all the neighbors. I was excited to be a big sister, naive to how his presence would reshape my entire childhood. The first signs were subtle. My piano recital that had been marked on the family calendar for months was suddenly missed because Aaron had a slight fever. Nothing serious, just a standard infant temperature, but enough that both parents stayed home with him instead of watching me play Beethoven after practicing for 3 months straight. As years passed, the pattern solidified. Aaron became the undisputed center of our family universe. When he started Little League Baseball, my parents never missed a single game, cheering loudly from the bleachers with customized t-shirts bearing his face and player number. Meanwhile, my ballet recitals, debate team competitions, and honor society inductions often found me scanning the audience for faces that were rarely there. I compensated by becoming fiercely independent and self-sufficient, while Aaron had his soccer gear purchased immediately and his science projects practically completed by my parents. I worked babysitting jobs from age 12 to buy my own school supplies and stayed up late completing assignments alone. I learned to forge my mother's signature on permission slips when she was too busy helping Aaron with his homework to sign mine. The year I turned 14, I had qualified for a prestigious statewide piano competition. After months of preparation, the big day arrived. I put on my nicest dress, arranged my hair carefully, and waited by the door. 10 minutes before we needed to leave, my mother casually mentioned that they would not be attending. Aaron had a baseball game that had been rescheduled at the last minute, and they simply could not miss it. I took 3 buses across town alone to play Chopin for a crowd of strangers, won 2nd place, and rode home with my silver trophy on my lap. When I arrived, no one asked how it went. The house was empty. They were still at Aaron's game. Despite everything, I maintained a desperate hope that my achievements would eventually earn equal love from my parents. I graduated as valedictorian of my high school class. As I delivered my speech from the podium, I spotted my parents in the crowd. For a brief moment, I saw pride in their eyes. But as soon as the ceremony ended and photographs were taken, the conversation immediately turned to Aaron's college prospects and baseball scholarship possibilities, though he was still only a freshman. That evening, as we ate celebration dinner at my favorite restaurant, a choice I was surprised they had honored, my father raised his glass in a toast. I held my breath, waiting for words of recognition and pride. "Your success reflects well on this family, Natalie," he said. "Now Aaron can see what hard work looks like." I smiled and clinked my glass against his, swallowing both champagne and disappointment. Even my greatest achievements were measured by their value to my brother. All through high school, I nurtured a dream of becoming a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a top-tier attorney at a prestigious firm, someone who could make a real difference. It was partly driven by genuine interest in justice, but I cannot deny that a significant motivation was to finally make my parents see my worth. I studied for the SATs with an almost manic intensity, joined every club that would look good on college applications, and wrote dozens of drafts of my personal statement. When acceptance letters arrived, including one from a prestigious East Coast university with a renowned pre-law program, my parents gave me a perfunctory "congratulations." The same week, Aaron hit a home run that won an ordinary season game, and my parents took the entire family out for an extravagant dinner in celebration, presenting him with an expensive new gaming console as a surprise. The contrast could not have been clearer, but I had grown so accustomed to the disparity that I barely felt the sting anymore. Or at least, that is what I told myself as I cried silently in my bedroom that night, acceptance letter clutched in my hand. College should have been my escape, a fresh start away from the shadow of being the lesser-loved child. In many ways, it was liberating. I excelled academically, making the dean's list every semester, and securing coveted internships. Yet, the patterns established in childhood proved difficult to break. While Aaron stumbled through his first attempt at community college, my parents paid his full tuition, bought him a car for the commute, and hired tutors when he struggled with basic courses. Meanwhile, they informed me that they could only contribute a small amount toward my education. "I understand that tuition is expensive," my father explained over the phone, "but you are smart enough to figure it out. You have always been so independent." That independence was not a choice, but a necessity born from years of emotional neglect. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus library, another 15 as a research assistant, and still managed to maintain a 3.9 GPA. During holidays, when other students went home to relax, I picked up seasonal retail jobs to save for the next semester's textbooks. In my final year of law school, during a particularly grueling study session for constitutional law, I met James. He was tall, ambitious, and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had always been supported in his endeavors. When we started dating, he was appalled at how little my parents contributed to my education compared to what his parents had done for him. "Let me guess," he said after meeting them for the first time, "they spoil your brother rotten, right?" I was stunned by his immediate perception of the dynamic I had normalized for so long. James saw in one dinner what I had spent a lifetime trying to ignore. When I introduced James to my family, my parents were polite but reserved. They asked perfunctory questions about his background and career plans, then quickly shifted the conversation to Aaron's latest exploits. By contrast, when Aaron brought home his girlfriend of 2 weeks the following month, my mother prepared an elaborate meal with all her favorites, based on information Aaron had shared, and my father spent hours showing her family photo albums and telling animated stories. The most painful example of their favoritism came when they missed my law school graduation, an achievement representing 7 years of higher education and countless sacrifices. Aaron, who had by then dropped out of 3 different colleges, had a baseball game in an adult recreational league. Not a championship, not a special event, just a regular weekend game in a hobby league for post-college athletes. I have never told anyone how much I cried that night, while James held me and assured me that my accomplishment was extraordinary, with or without my parents' acknowledgement. The next day, I called them, and my mother casually explained they had wanted to come, but Aaron would have been so disappointed if they missed his game. The implicit message was clear: his disappointment mattered more than mine. Despite their lackluster support, James and I got engaged a year after graduation. When we began planning the wedding, new tensions emerged. My parents contributed a fraction of what they could afford, yet attempted to control every decision from the guest list to the menu. When I selected a venue they deemed too expensive, my mother remarked, "Well, if you had chosen a more practical career path like teaching, you would not have all this student debt limiting your options." The irony that they had fully funded Aaron's failed attempts at degrees in fields he lost interest in after a semester was apparently lost on them. We had a small but beautiful wedding, with Jameis' warm and supportive family making up for the emotional absence of mine. My parents attended, of course, maintaining appearances as they always did. They posed for photographs, made appropriate speeches, and then complained about the limited selection at the bar and the unseasonably warm weather that made the outdoor ceremony uncomfortable. After the wedding, James and I settled into married life in Boston. I secured a position at a mid-sized firm specializing in corporate law, working punishing hours to establish my career. We bought a small condo, adopted a cat named Justice, and created a life that felt like a refuge from the emotional inequity of my childhood home. I made dutiful calls to my parents every Sunday, visits on major holidays, and sent thoughtful gifts for birthdays and anniversaries. Yet each interaction left me emotionally drained, as conversations inevitably centered around Aaron's latest ventures, his relationships, or my parents' concerns about his direction in life. My achievements at work, our home renovations, or plans for the future warranted only passing interest. When James and I suffered a heartbreaking miscarriage in our 3rd year of marriage, my mother expressed brief sympathy before changing the subject to Aaron's girlfriend troubles. I ended the call early and sobbed in Jameis' arms, finally voicing what I had always known but never fully acknowledged. My parents will never love me the way they love him. I will always be an afterthought. It was the first time I had said it aloud, and somehow, naming the truth made it both more painful and more liberating. James suggested I consider therapy to process the years of emotional neglect, but I was not ready. Instead, I threw myself deeper into my career, seeking the validation there that had always been withheld at home. 5 years into our marriage, I was offered a position at a prestigious law firm in Chicago, a significant step up in both responsibility and compensation. The decision to move meant leaving Boston, the city where both James and I had built our careers. But the opportunity was too valuable to pass up. James, who worked in financial consulting, was able to transfer to his firm's Chicago office, though the move represented a lateral step rather than an advancement for him. We found a beautiful apartment in Lincoln Park, with large windows overlooking the city and enough space for a home office. The first year was exhilarating. I thrived in the competitive environment of the new firm, quickly establishing myself as someone who could handle complex cases and demanding clients. My salary nearly doubled, and for the first time in my life, I felt financially secure. The distance from my parents was both physical and emotional. Our calls became less frequent, with the 3-hour time difference providing a convenient excuse. When we did speak, I found myself less affected by their persistent focus on Aaron and his struggles. I was building a life where their approval mattered less. Meanwhile, Aaron had embarked on yet another venture, a sports memorabilia business that my parents helped finance with what I later learned was a withdrawal from their retirement fund. When I expressed concern about this during a rare visit home for Thanksgiving, my father dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "Aaron has tremendous entrepreneurial spirit," he declared proudly. "He just needs the right opportunity to showcase his talents." I bit my tongue, refraining from pointing out that this was the 4th right opportunity they had financed in as many years. As my career accelerated, subtle tensions emerged in my marriage. James began making comments about my long hours, the work dinners I could not miss, the vacations we had to postpone. When we had moved to Boston, I had supported his career without question. Now that the dynamic had shifted, with my job taking precedence, he struggled to adjust. I tried to compensate by making our limited time together special planning, elaborate date nights, surprising him with weekend getaways, handling most of the household responsibilities despite my heavier workload. Yet the resentment simmered beneath the surface of our interactions. 12 days before our 6th anniversary, I came home early, planning to surprise James with tickets to a concert by his favorite jazz musician. I found him in our bedroom with my colleague Sarah, a junior associate who had joined the firm 3 months earlier. The confrontation that followed was ugly. James did not deny the affair, but instead turned the blame toward me. If you were ever home, if you ever put our marriage before your career, if you were not so emotionally closed off, the accusations poured out, each one striking a nerve exposed by years of parental neglect. Was I truly incapable of being loved? Was I fundamentally flawed in some way that made me unworthy of loyalty and commitment? I moved into a hotel that night, unable to bear the sight of our apartment, the bed, the life we had built together. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time since joining the firm, and spent the day alternating between tearful breakdowns and numb, staring at the hotel room wall. In a moment of vulnerability, I called my mother. I needed parental comfort, the unconditional support that had always been so elusive. Through tears, I explained what had happened, how my life was falling apart, how devastated and betrayed I felt. There was a long pause on the line before my mother responded. Well, Natalie, marriages take work. Maybe if you had focused more on being a wife than on being a lawyer, things would be different. The victim blaming hit me like a physical blow. In that moment, I needed compassion, not criticism disguised as wisdom. I ended the call abruptly and sat in stunned silence, confronting the reality that even in my darkest moment, my parents could not offer the emotional support most daughters take for granted. The divorce proceedings began 2 weeks later. What I had naively expected to be a straightforward separation became complicated when James hired an aggressive attorney who challenged our prenuptial agreement. He claimed duress at the time of signing and sought half of my partnership earnings, despite the fact that we had been married for just 6 years and had no children. Legal fees mounted as the process dragged on. Then, in a cosmic joke of timing, my apartment building suffered major water damage from a burst pipe in the unit above. With most of my possessions in storage and ongoing hotel costs draining my savings, I found myself in a financial spiral that my currently divided attention at work was only making worse. Desperate and humbled, I called my father. I explained that I needed a temporary loan, just $15,000 to secure a new apartment and cover living expenses until the divorce was settled. I promised to repay every cent with interest. Your mother and I are on a fixed income now, Natalie, he responded with a hint of irritation. We cannot just bail you out of problems that you should have anticipated. You are a grown woman with a good job. Figure it out. The conversation left me shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. 2 days later, my cousin Jennifer called to catch up and mentioned casually that my parents had just given Aaron $50,000 to expand his struggling business. I thanked her for the call and then threw my phone against the hotel room wall so hard that the screen shattered. The months that followed my parents' rejection were the hardest of my life. The divorce dragged on, with James and his attorney using every delaying tactic possible. My focus at work suffered, putting my partnership track at risk. I was forced to move into a tiny studio apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, a far cry from the spacious Lincoln Park home I had shared with James. Through a mutual friend, I learned that my mother had told several family members that my divorce was my own fault for being career-obsessed and neglecting my husband. The betrayal cut deep, not just because she blamed me for James' infidelity, but because she had shared this perspective with others while offering me no support. I worked 60, sometimes 70-hour weeks, trying to keep my career on track while navigating the divorce proceedings. I ate microwave meals, standing at my kitchen counter, fell asleep with case files scattered across my bed, and woke up with anxiety that made it hard to breathe. Through it all, my parents remained distant, their calls perfunctory when they happened at all. The contrast between their treatment of me and Aaron became even more stark during this period. While I struggled, alone and unsupported, Aaron continued to receive not just financial backing but emotional comfort as well. When his memorabilia business inevitably failed, my parents immediately funded his next idea, a sports-themed bar near Fenway Park. One evening, scrolling through social media in my empty apartment, I came across photos of my parents with Aaron and his new girlfriend on a vacation to Florida. The four of them smiling on a beach, cocktails in hand, without a care in the world. The same month, they had told me they could not afford to help me secure housing during a crisis. When Christmas arrived, I could not face the prospect of returning to Boston, of sitting at the family table pretending all was well. I called to explain that my work schedule made travel impossible, a transparent lie that no one challenged. I spent the holiday alone in my apartment, watching old movies and drinking too much wine. Through social media, I watched my extended family celebrate together. Photos showed piles of gifts around the tree, many tagged with Aaron's name. My mother had sent me a department store gift card with a generic message. When my father's 60th birthday approached in February, I made an effort to reconnect. I flew to Boston for the weekend celebration, bringing a thoughtfully selected watch I could barely afford. It was a peace offering, an attempt to rebuild the relationship despite everything. At the party, I was treated as an afterthought. My mother introduced me to her friends as my daughter, the lawyer from Chicago, with none of the warmth she showed when presenting Aaron as my brilliant son who owns his own business. The business that had opened with their money and would close 6 months later. The breaking point came during dinner, when my mother pulled me aside ostensibly to check in on how I was doing. I made the mistake of being honest, sharing that while the divorce was finally nearing completion, I was struggling emotionally with the betrayal and loneliness. She sighed heavily, patting my hand in a gesture that felt more dismissive than comforting. You know, Natalie, if you had tried harder with James, perhaps been more attentive, more supportive of his needs, things might have turned out differently. Men need to feel appreciated. The statement hit me like a slap. My husband had cheated on me with a colleague in our bed, and my mother was suggesting it was because I had not been attentive enough. The double standard was breathtaking. When Aaron's previous girlfriend had broken up with him because of his irresponsibility and lack of ambition, my parents had comforted him for weeks, assuring him that she had not been good enough for him. I stood up from the table, hands shaking. You have never, not once in my entire life, given me the benefit of the doubt or the support you freely give Aaron. My voice was quiet but firm. I have done everything right. I have worked myself to exhaustion to make you proud. I have been independent because I had to be, not because I wanted to be. And still, you find ways to make my pain my fault. I left the party early and changed my flight to that night, instead of the following day. On the plane back to Chicago, I made a decision that was both terrifying and liberating. I would stop seeking the approval and love that had been withheld for 30 years. I would build a life without the constant disappointment of parental favoritism. I would, effectively, divorce my parents, as I had divorced James. For the next several months, I declined calls from home, sent brief responses to texts, and made excuses to avoid visits. I sent cards on birthdays and appropriate holidays, maintaining the bare minimum of contact that would not cause a family scandal. When asked directly how I was doing, I gave vague, positive answers that closed rather than opened conversation. The breaking point came during dinner, when my mother pulled me aside ostensibly to check in on how I was doing. I made the mistake of being honest, sharing that while the divorce was finally nearing completion, I was struggling emotionally with the betrayal and loneliness. With the emotional drain of seeking parental approval removed from my life, I found new energy to rebuild. The divorce was finally settled, with James receiving less than he had demanded but more than he deserved. I was left with significant debt but also with freedom and clarity of purpose. I approached my work with renewed focus and determination. No longer distracted by family drama or marital problems, I poured myself into complex cases, often staying at the office until the cleaning staff arrived. My billable hours exceeded targets by 40%, and senior partners began to take notice. Recognizing that my all-work approach was ultimately unsustainable, I also forced myself to address my emotional health. I found a therapist named Dr. Rivera, who specialized in family dynamics and parental favoritism. Our weekly sessions were often painful, peeling back layers of hurt I had suppressed for decades. "You have spent your entire life trying to earn love that should have been freely given," Dr. Rivera observed during one particularly difficult session. The recognition brought me to tears, but also began a process of genuine healing. Slowly, I built a chosen family of friends and colleagues who valued me for exactly who I was. My assistant Rachel began inviting me to her family gatherings, where her boisterous Italian-American relatives embraced me without question. Junior associates at the firm sought my mentorship, appreciating the guidance I wished I had received early in my career. Most significantly, I developed a close relationship with Victoria Chen, a senior partner who saw potential in me that I sometimes doubted myself. 58 years old with a reputation for brilliance and brutal honesty, Victoria became the mentor I had always needed. After observing me handle a particularly challenging deposition, she invited me to coffee and offered candid feedback on both my strengths and weaknesses. "You have exceptional analytical skills and presence in the courtroom," she told me, "but you work like someone trying to outrun something. Sustainable success requires balance." Under her guidance, I began to approach my career more strategically, focusing on quality over quantity and developing my own client relationships, rather than simply executing work for senior partners. When a high-profile case involving corporate fraud allegations against a major pharmaceutical company came in, Victoria recommended me to lead the defense team despite my relatively junior status. The case consumed 6 months of my life, but resulted in a favorable settlement that saved our client millions while implementing meaningful compliance reforms. The morning after the settlement was finalized, I arrived at my office to find a handwritten note from Victoria on my desk. "Exceptional work, Natalie. You have earned your place at the table not by working yourself to death, but by being smarter and more strategic than your opponents. I see great things ahead for you." Signed with her characteristically precise signature. I framed the note and hung it behind my desk, a reminder that genuine recognition comes from those who truly see your value. The professional success translated to financial recovery. By my 31st birthday, I had paid off the divorce-related debt and saved enough for a down payment on a small but elegant condo in a doorman building with a view of Lake Michigan. The day I signed the mortgage papers as a single woman, using only my own name and credit, was one of the proudest moments of my adult life. My interactions with my parents during this period were minimal and carefully managed. I called on major holidays, sent appropriate gifts, and deflected questions about visits with vague references to my busy schedule. I shared little about my professional achievements or personal growth, knowing from experience that these would be acknowledged only briefly before the conversation turned to Aaron. From occasional communications with extended family, I learned that Aaron continued his pattern of failed ventures and parental bailouts. The sports bar closed within a year, followed by an attempt at a food delivery app that never launched, despite significant investment. My parents refinanced their house to fund his projects, a fact they never mentioned during our infrequent calls. In this period of rebuilding, I also cautiously re-entered the dating world. After a few forgettable first dates arranged through well-meaning friends, I met Michael at a charity gala hosted by my firm. A pediatric surgeon with kind eyes and a quick wit, he approached relationships with the same thoughtful intentionality he brought to his medical practice. Unlike James, who had resented my ambition, Michael respected and admired my dedication to my career. He understood the demands of a high-pressure profession and never made me feel guilty for late nights or working weekends when necessary. More importantly, he recognized the emotional wounds I carried and never used them as weapons during disagreements. After dating for 8 months, I finally shared the full story of my family dynamics, expecting the usual uncomfortable sympathy or well-meaning but unhelpful advice. Instead, Michael listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and then said something that shifted my perspective. Your parents' failure to value you properly reflects their limitations, not your worth, he told me, holding my hand across the dinner table. Their inability to love you as you deserve says everything about them and nothing about you. It was a simple statement, but profound in its impact. For the first time, I truly internalized that the problem had never been me. No achievement, no success, no amount of perfection would have changed the fundamental imbalance in my parents' hearts. The liberation in that realization was life-changing. As my personal and professional life flourished, I received increasingly concerning updates about Aaron through family channels. There were rumors of gambling debts, 2 DUIs handled quietly with expensive lawyers, and business investors threatening legal action. My parents shielded him from consequences, as they always had, mortgaging their retirement security to protect him from the results of his own choices. I felt a complex mixture of emotions about his situation. There was the lingering hurt of the disparity in how we had been treated, a small, shameful part of me that felt vindicated by his failures, and genuine concern for my brother as a human being. We had never been close, the age gap and parental favoritism creating a chasm between us, but he was still family. I attempted once to reach out directly, suggesting coffee when I was in Boston for a case. His response was dismissive, clearly influenced by whatever narrative our parents had constructed about my distance from the family. I did not push further, accepting that some relationships may never be what we wish they could be. By my 32nd birthday, I had created a life that felt authentic and fulfilling. I had close friends, a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection, and a career trajectory that exceeded even my ambitious goals. I had made peace with the reality of my family's situation, establishing boundaries that protected my emotional well-being while maintaining minimal contact. I believed I had finally broken free from the dysfunction of my childhood, that I had moved beyond the hurt and disappointment. I was wrong. The real test of my healing, and of my character, came at 2:15 on a Tuesday morning, when my phone rang with a call from my parents' number. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the darkness of my bedroom, startling me from a deep sleep. The illuminated screen showed my parents' number, something that would have been unusual at any hour but was alarming at 2:15 in the morning. My first thought was that someone had died. Natalie? My mother's voice was barely recognizable, high-pitched and breathless with panic. We need your help. It's Aaron. Has been arrested. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, aware of Michael stirring beside me. Something serious must have happened for my mother to call at this hour, especially given our distant relationship over the past year and a half. What's happened? I asked, keeping my voice neutral despite the adrenaline now coursing through my system. The story spilled out in a chaotic narrative, punctuated by my mother's sobs and my father's angry interjections in the background. Aaron had been arrested for wire fraud and embezzlement related to his latest business venture, a cryptocurrency investment platform that had apparently been operating as a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. The authorities alleged he had defrauded investors of nearly $2 million. He needs a lawyer, Natalie, a good one. Your father and we put up our house for his bail, but we need help with legal fees. You work at that big firm, you must know people. You have to help us. The desperation in my mother's voice was palpable, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the old familiar response, the ingrained need to solve problems and earn approval. But alongside it rose a wave of bitter memories. The times I had needed help and been told to figure it out myself. The dismissal of my pain during the divorce. The decades of favoritism that had shaped my childhood and early adulthood. I could picture them clearly in their home in Boston. My mother in her floral robe, my father pacing in his slippers, their world collapsing around them as the golden child finally faced consequences they could not shield him from. For the first time, they needed me more than I needed them. I'll need to know more details before I can offer any advice, I said carefully, professional training kicking in despite the emotional complexity of the situation. How much is the bail? What exactly are the charges? Who is representing him currently? As they answered my questions, a clearer picture emerged, each detail more damning than the last. Aaron had created a company that promised extraordinary returns on cryptocurrency investments. He had used early investors' money to fund an extravagant lifestyle while attracting new victims with fabricated success stories. When the scheme inevitably collapsed, multiple investors had gone to authorities. The evidence against him was substantial. My parents had mortgaged their home to post his $500,000 bail, depleting their retirement savings in the process. The court had assigned a public defender whom my father dismissed as useless. They wanted me to either represent Aaron myself or arrange for my firm to take the case pro bono. They also needed money for ongoing expenses, while they focused on supporting Aaron through his crisis. Natalie, you have to understand. Your father is having chest pains from the stress, my mother said, her voice taking on the manipulative tone I recognized from childhood. We're still your parents, no matter what disagreements we've had. Family helps family. The statement landed like a cruel joke given our history. Where was this family loyalty when I had needed it? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I'll need to think about this, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. It's the middle of the night, and this is a lot to process. I'll call you tomorrow after I've had some time to consider the options. My mother began to protest, but I ended the call with a firm goodbye. I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, phone still in hand, emotions swirling. Michael turned on the bedside lamp and studied my face with concern. Family emergency? He asked gently. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Family, hypocrisy, emergency is more accurate. I recounted the conversation, the situation with Aaron, and the decades of context that made this middle-of-the-night plea so ironic. What are you thinking of doing? Michael asked when I had finished, not offering advice but creating space for me to process my thoughts. My first instinct is to tell them to figure it out themselves, I admitted, to use their exact words back to them. They abandoned me during the worst period of my life, and now they expect me to rush in and save their precious son? I paced the bedroom, energy and anger making sleep impossible. The more I thought about it, the more my rage built. Every birthday celebration focused on Aaron, every achievement of mine minimized, every request for support denied while he received endless resources and chances. 3 decades of inequality and emotional neglect culminating in this audacious request for help. I could refuse them outright. It would be justified, perhaps even cathartic. I imagined the satisfaction of saying no, of allowing them to experience the same abandonment they had inflicted on me. The fantasy was briefly sweet, but quickly turned hollow. Or I could help unconditionally, fall back into the familiar pattern of attempting to earn love through sacrifice and performance. Take on Aaron's case, write checks for their expenses, be the dutiful daughter despite everything. The thought made my stomach turn. Neither option felt right. Neither reflected the person I had worked so hard to become. I spent the rest of the night wrestling with the decision, weighing justice against mercy, boundaries against compassion. When morning came, I called Dr. Rivera and arranged an emergency session during my lunch break. They have placed you in an impossible position, she observed after I explained the situation. But this is also an opportunity to establish a new dynamic, one based on honesty and appropriate boundaries, rather than resentment and capitulation. We discussed potential approaches, the psychological implications of different responses, and what healthy boundaries might look like in this specific situation. By the end of the session, I had formulated a plan that honored both my history and my healing. That evening, I called my parents back. Michael sat beside me on the couch, a silent support as I navigated this crucial conversation. I've given your situation a lot of thought, I began when my father answered. I am willing to help, but we need to be clear about what that help will look like and what it will require from all of us. There was a pause before my father responded, his voice guarded. What exactly do you mean? I mean that I will provide consultation on Aaron's legal situation and can recommend attorneys who specialize in white-collar crime, I explained calmly. I will not personally represent him or ask my firm to take the case pro bono, as that would be an ethical conflict and inappropriate use of my professional position. I continued before he could interrupt. I will not provide financial assistance for his legal fees or for your living expenses. What I am offering is my professional expertise and guidance through this process, contingent upon all of us, including Aaron, attending family therapy to address the long-standing patterns that have contributed to this situation. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When my father finally spoke, his voice was tight with barely controlled anger. So you're using our crisis as leverage to force therapy on us? This is about your brother facing serious charges, Natalie, not about your feelings or childhood grievances. I had anticipated this response, the deflection and minimization that had characterized so many family interactions. This time, I was prepared. No, Dad. This is about setting healthy boundaries while still offering help. Aaron is facing consequences for his actions, after a lifetime of being shielded from them. I'm offering valuable professional assistance that could make a significant difference in his case, but I will not participate in the dysfunctional patterns that brought us all to this point. My mother took the phone, her voice tearful, but with an edge of the manipulation I recognized all too well. Natalie, honey, we understand you've had some feelings about how we've treated you and Aaron differently, but this isn't the time to work through family therapy. Your brother could go to prison. I took a deep breath, centering myself before responding. Mom, Aaron may indeed face prison time, regardless of who represents him. The evidence sounds substantial. What I'm offering is help navigating a difficult legal situation, while also addressing the family dynamics that have enabled his behavior for years. Those are my terms. You can accept them or seek help elsewhere. Another long silence followed. I could almost hear their unspoken communication, the looks exchanged, the silent calculation of options. Finally, my father returned to the phone. Well, consider your offer, he said stiffly. In the meantime, could you at least send information about attorneys who might take Aaron's case? I agreed to email a list of reputable criminal defense lawyers specializing in financial crimes, ending the call with a calm assurance that I would be available to discuss next steps when they had made their decision about my terms. After hanging up, I leaned against Michael, emotionally exhausted but also experiencing a strange sense of peace. For the first time in my relationship with my parents, I had stated my boundaries clearly and stood firm in the face of their manipulative tactics. That was impressive, Michael said, kissing the top of my head. How are you feeling? Terrified, I admitted, and sad, and somehow relieved, all at once. In the days that followed, I sent the promised list of attorneys and waited. 3 days passed without contact, then 4, then a week. I knew they were testing my resolve, hoping I would cave and offer unconditional help, as I had always done in the past. This time, I held firm. 9 days after our call, my mother contacted me again. Her voice was subdued, the desperation now tinged with resignation. We would like to accept your help, she said without preamble, and, well, do the family therapy, if that's what it takes. I felt no triumph in their capitulation, only a somber recognition that we were entering uncharted territory in our family dynamic. I had stood my ground, and for once, they had been forced to meet me where I was, rather than demanding I come to them. The stage was set for a confrontation 32 years in the making. The following Saturday, I flew to Boston for the first time in over a year. Michael had offered to accompany me, but this was a journey I needed to make alone. As the plane descended through cloud cover, revealing the familiar coastline, I felt a complex mixture of anxiety and determination. I was no longer the desperate daughter seeking approval, but a grown woman with boundaries and self-respect. My parents' house looked smaller than I remembered, the once immaculate lawn now showing signs of neglect. I parked my rental car in the driveway, and sat for a moment, gathering my courage before approaching the front door. My mother answered on the second knock. The woman who stood before me barely resembled the polished, confident mother of my childhood. Her hair, normally perfectly colored and styled, showed gray roots and hung limply around her tired face. Deep lines bracketed her mouth, and her eyes held a haunted quality I had never seen before. "Natalie," she said, her voice catching slightly, "thank you for coming." The formal politeness between us felt strange after decades of complicated history. She led me into the living room where my father waited. He too had aged dramatically in the months since I'd last seen him. Always a robust, authoritative presence, he now seemed diminished, his shoulders hunched forward, his complexion grayish. He stood to greet me with a stiff nod but did not offer an embrace. Aaron was notably absent. Currently at a friend's, my mother explained vaguely when I inquired, though I suspected he was avoiding this initial confrontation. We sat awkwardly in the living room, where I had spent so many holidays feeling invisible. Family photos still lined the mantel, the majority featuring Aaron at various ages and stages. I noticed with a pang that my law school graduation photo, once displayed out of obligation, had been removed entirely. The visual representation of our family dynamic could not have been clearer. My father cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. "We've spoken with one of the attorneys you recommended. He thinks he can get the charges reduced, possibly avoid prison time with a plea deal." I nodded professionally. "Roger Hamilton is excellent at negotiating with prosecutors. What is he proposing specifically?" As my father outlined the legal strategy, I could see both parents visibly relaxing, falling into the familiar pattern of discussing Aaron and his needs. This was comfortable territory for them, unlike the emotional reckoning I had required as a condition of my help. When he finished, I set my purse aside and leaned forward, making direct eye contact with both of them. Now that we've covered the legal aspects, we need to discuss the family therapy component of our agreement. The tension in the room immediately thickened. My mother fidgeted with her wedding ring, a nervous habit from my childhood. My father crossed his arms defensively. "Is that really necessary, Natalie?" he asked, his tone dismissive. "With everything going on with Aaron, it seems self-indulgent to focus on therapy right now." It was the exact response I had anticipated, the deflection and minimization that had characterized our family dynamic for decades. This time, I did not back down. "It is not only necessary, it's non-negotiable," I stated calmly. "I have arranged a consultation with Dr. Helen Marshall, a family therapist who specializes in adult family dynamics. Our first session is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10. My father began to protest, but I continued steadily. "This is not a negotiation. If you want my continued legal consultation and assistance navigating Aaron's case, this is the requirement. I am not asking for financial support or even for an apology at this stage. I am asking for honest engagement in a therapeutic process." The directness of my approach seemed to shock them into silence. For perhaps the first time in my life, I was setting the terms of our interaction, rather than desperately trying to earn their approval on their terms. After a long pause, my mother spoke, her voice small. "What exactly will this therapy involve?" I explained the process as Dr. Marshall had outlined it to me. Initially, it would involve separate sessions for each family member, followed by targeted joint sessions to address specific relationship dynamics. The goal was not to assign blame, but to establish healthier patterns of communication and interaction. "This isn't about punishing you," I clarified, seeing the defensiveness in my father's posture. "It's about healing patterns that have hurt all of us, including Aaron. His current situation did not happen in isolation. It is the result of years of enablement and lack of accountability." My father flinched at the word enablement but did not argue. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her armor of perfectionism cracking to reveal the frightened, overwhelmed woman beneath. "We've always loved both of our children," she said, her voice wavering. "We never meant to hurt you, Natalie." "I know you believe that, Mom," I responded gently but firmly. "And that's something we'll explore in therapy. Intent and impact are often very different things." We spoke for another hour, carefully navigating the surface of deeper issues that would require professional guidance to fully address. I maintained clear boundaries, redirecting when they attempted to make the conversation entirely about Aaron, or to minimize the seriousness of the family dynamics I was insisting we confront. As I prepared to leave for my hotel, my father surprised me by asking a question that revealed perhaps the first genuine curiosity about my experience he had ever expressed. "Were we really so terrible to you?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. I paused at the door, considering my response carefully. I had rehearsed confrontations with my parents for years in my mind, imagined listing every slight, every disappointment, every moment of painful inequity. In this moment, however, I chose a different approach. "You were wonderful parents to Aaron," I said simply. "I just needed you to be wonderful parents to me too." The therapy session the following morning was as difficult as I had anticipated. Aaron attended, sullen and defensive, clearly there only because of the leverage I held over his legal situation. My parents presented a united front of polite cooperation masking deep resistance. Dr. Marshall, an experienced therapist with a calm, authoritative presence, recognized the dynamics immediately. Over the course of 2 hours, she established ground rules for our ongoing work together, conducted a brief assessment of each family member's perspective, and assigned individual sessions before our next group meeting. When my father attempted to dominate the conversation, she gently but firmly redirected. When my mother became tearful about Aaron's potential incarceration, Dr. Marshall acknowledged her fear while maintaining focus on the larger family patterns. I returned to Chicago the following day, having arranged to participate in future family sessions via video conference when I could not be physically present in Boston. Over the next several weeks, I consulted regularly with Aaron's attorney, providing insights on strategy and helping to interpret legal complexities for my parents. The dual processes of Aaron's legal case and our family therapy unfolded in parallel. In court, Aaron eventually accepted a plea deal that included restitution to his victims, a significant fine, and 2 years of house arrest with 5 years probation. He avoided prison time primarily due to the skill of his attorney and his agreement to cooperate with authorities investigating larger financial crimes in the cryptocurrency space. In therapy, progress was slower and less linear. Initial sessions were tense and often unproductive, with my parents resistant to examining their role in the family dysfunction. My father, in particular, struggled with the suggestion that his parenting had been anything less than exemplary. Aaron vacillated between resentful participation and genuine moments of insight about how parental enablement had contributed to his poor choices. The breakthrough came nearly 3 months into our therapy, during a session focused specifically on my experience of growing up as the less favored child. Dr. Marshall had asked me to share specific memories that illustrated the disparity in treatment. With her guidance, I described several pivotal moments from my childhood and early adulthood, speaking not in accusation but in a sincere effort to help my parents understand the cumulative impact of their choices. I recounted the missed piano recital when I was 9, the high school valedictorian speech where they had quickly shifted focus to Aaron, the law school graduation they had skipped for his recreational baseball game, and finally, their refusal to help during my divorce, while continuing to fund his failing ventures. As I spoke, I watched my mother's face crumple, with a recognition I had never seen before. When I finished, there was a long silence in the room. "I had no idea," she finally whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I never saw it that way. I thought you were the strong one, the independent one who didn't need us the way Aaron did." My father sat rigid in his chair, jaw clenched, but I could see the conflict in his eyes, the beginning of an uncomfortable reckoning with decades of choices. In the sessions that followed, We began the painful process of rebuilding our relationship on more honest terms. There were setbacks and difficult moments. My father stormed out of one particularly challenging session when Dr. Marshall pressed him on his different expectations for his son and daughter. Aaron missed several appointments when the discussion became too personally confronting. Yet slowly, incrementally, change began to take root. My mother called me directly, not to discuss Aaron, but to ask about my work, my relationship with Michael, my life in Chicago. My father, after weeks of resistance, finally broke down during a one-on-one session with Dr. Marshall. In our next family meeting, he addressed me directly with tears in his eyes. "I was wrong, Natalie," he said, his voice unsteady. "I told myself I was being a good father because I provided for you materially, because I pushed you to excel. But I failed to give you what every child deserves: unconditional love and support. I failed you, and am deeply sorry." The apology was not a magical solution to decades of hurt, but it was a beginning, a foundation upon which we could build something new if we chose to. 6 months after Aaron's arrest, Michael proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Geneva. When I called to share the news with my parents, my mother asked thoughtful questions about our plans and offered to help in any way we wanted, without attempting to take control. My father expressed genuine happiness and, for the first time in my memory, pride in me that was not compared to or overshadowed by Aaron. We planned a small wedding for the following spring. Throughout the planning process, my parents respected our choices and contributed financially without strings attached. When the day arrived, my father walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes. During his toast at the reception, he spoke words I had waited a lifetime to hear. "Natalie has always been extraordinary," he said, looking directly at me. "Her intelligence, her determination, her capacity for forgiveness and growth have humbled me. I am more proud to be her father than words can express." Aaron attended the wedding with his new girlfriend, a grounded, straightforward woman who seemed to expect accountability from him in a way previous partners had not. Our relationship remained complicated, but therapy had helped us begin to relate to each other as adults rather than as competitors for parental attention and resources. The journey of healing our family has been neither quick nor easy. There have been difficult conversations, painful recognitions, and moments of backsliding into old patterns. Yet the honest foundation we have built has allowed for something I never thought possible: a relationship with my parents based on mutual respect rather than performance and approval seeking. I no longer measure my worth by their validation. The confidence and self-respect I fought so hard to develop have become integral to who I am, regardless of external affirmation. And paradoxically, it was only when I stopped desperately seeking their approval that a healthier relationship became possible. If you have ever felt like the less favored child, if you have spent years trying to earn love that should have been freely given, I want you to know that your worth is not determined by someone else's inability to value you properly. The healing begins when you recognize that the problem was never you. Have you experienced favoritism in your family? How did you handle it? Please share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to hear more journeys of setting boundaries and finding self-worth. Remember, sometimes the most important family we have is the one we choose for ourselves. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage on your own path to healing.